But in the weeks after a historic heat wave roasted much of the planet, the lauded science fiction writers' concerns about geoengineering feel much more pressing. The revulsion against geoengineering has to be rethought, Robinson told HuffPost. If 100 million people die in one heat wave, and the government of India says we are going to imitate a volcanic explosion and throw dust into the air to block out the sun, are we going to tell them they can't? The truth is the politics of large-scale intervention in the climate system rarely align with the promises of geoengineering. Proposals to launch parasol satellites or spray sulfur dioxide gases into the atmosphere to reflect sun rays away from Earth. Grave threats, according to a study published in Nature this January, because if any government goes rogue, the effects could be disastrous. Building underwater seawalls to prop up Arctic glaciers and slow down the melting in Greenland? An expensive venture that would only buy some time. It's not hard to see why some call geoengineering the big bad fix. How do you define geoengineering and what are the forms it will most likely take? I guess the definition would be something like a deliberate planned attempt by human beings to mitigate the damages of climate change, of carbon dioxide and methane buildup in the atmosphere, and of ecological damage generally, by way of some action that is large-scale if not global in reach, then regional in ways that might have global repercussions. I've been saying that geoengineering is a bad name because engineering implies we know what we're doing more than we really do. Also, that we have more powers than we actually have. I've suggested we think of it as geo-finessing or geo-tweaking or even geo-begging, to better indicate our relative ignorance and weakness in the face of global geochemical processes. Lots of those processes we can't do anything about, even if we really want to. So the name needs some unpacking. Why do you think people, particularly on the left, are so concerned about geoengineering? Because we don't know enough about it to be confident that anything we attempt in that way won't cause even worse knock-on effects. It's a legitimate concern, although it can be exaggerated. Casting particles into the atmosphere might harm the monsoon, yes, that's a real concern. But thinking it will cast us into an ice age is not paying attention to what Mount Pinatubo's eruption did nor to the physics of the situation. Okay, so give me the socialist utopian case for geoengineering. So this is getting into a very science-fictional area, a kind of thought experiment that follows the trajectories of where we are going now. If we get to a bad enough state with the climate and Earth's biosphere generally headed for a mass extinction event that will hammer humanity, the utopian aspect of it gets a little into the negative side, but it is still there, which is to say, if we can get out of the 21st century without a mass extinction event, that's looking pretty utopian right now. So get used to that, admit the trajectory we are on, and start thinking of all possible solutions, or rather mitigations, as being on the table for consideration. How do you make geoengineering equitable? If democratically elected representative governments were to agree with each other to do it, using existing treaty systems and the UN, the Paris Accords, etc., and it kept millions of people, often the least culpable when it comes to fossil fuel burning, from dying, then I guess you could say it was equitable. What's the worst case scenario you can imagine? And the best case scenario? The best case scenario is also completely possible from our current situation, despite the trajectory we are on. It would be a just, sustainable world in which the energy flows in the biosphere were in balance, such that the extinction rates would be normal, ecosystems everywhere restored to health, and 10 billion humans shrinking quite naturally in number as all the women in the world began living in complete gender equality, were all living with adequate food, water, shelter, clothing, health care, education, and work. This best case scenario, the utopian turn, is physically possible if it were the goal of human civilization and became what we were all working toward together. The crucial technologies involved are not so much physical as they are social, which is to say, we have to have ecologically guided economics and politics. It is by its very nature a leftist vision, in that it foregrounds justice and welfare for all. How has the way you write about geoengineering in your books changed over time? Those have been the major explorations in stories so far. I think I'll have to try again with another scenario. No one can predict the future that will really come, that's impossible. But scenarios can be outlined as a kind of modeling exercise, to help us make decisions about what to do now to get to a future we want. It's the story of the century, so it makes sense to keep coming back to it. Does most science fiction help or harm the public perception of geoengineering? Are you afraid for the future? What makes you most hopeful for a future in which humans who aren't ultra-rich can still thrive? Progressive taxation, progressive politics, the Paris Accords, the Endangered Species Act, leftists everywhere on Earth including China, environmentalists everywhere, the growing Green-Red Coalition or United Front of Environmentalists and Leftists, the creative power of STEM, the humanist traditions in philosophy, people's concern for their children, the growing sense of a global village we are all part of, the urge to survive. These are some of the things that make me hopeful. Hope is stubborn. It exists in us at the cellular level and works up from there, as part of the urge to live. So hope will persist. The question is, can we put it to use?